20 years ago this Friday, I walked out of my highly paid job at Deloitte as a senior managing consultant. And in order to prep myself for the life ahead of entrepreneurship and creativity, I took a kind of unconventional step. I took a course in stand-up comedy in Soho. And what I wanted to do was try my hand at actually being a comedian. And I wasn't sure whether I really wanted to be a comedian full-time or anything, but I thought the course would be interesting. And quite a few people over my life have said I'm funny, which is something I like about myself. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I should start listening to these people and actually try it out and see if I can do something on the stage. So I took this course with Logan Murray, who's a very experienced comedian and comedy teacher. There are about 20 of us on the course, and we just practiced writing material, standing up at a comedy club, this is during the day on a Saturday, every week for 12 weeks, and delivering our material. And I was quite bad. The problem was, I'd been used to writing funny material. So I'd written, for instance, a humorous piece for the Reader's Digest that had been published, it had gone down well, I got paid really well for it. It was one of my first pieces of paid writing ever. And there's a big difference between writing funny and performing funny. And so a lot of the reactions I was getting when I was on stage at this comedy club with my fellow learners, fellow comedy students, was just like, oh yeah, that's funny. Or just kind of like, oh yeah, really interesting. So I was making interesting, humorous, entertaining points. And of course that doesn't really work in comedy. You need people to actually laugh out loud, otherwise it's not considered a good result. So I practiced and practiced. I just wrote lots of material and basically wrote down everything I could think of that I thought would be funny, then tried it out on the Saturday, and the stuff that wasn't funny enough, I crossed out, or I moved it down this big Microsoft Word doc I had, and then eventually I ended up with 5 minutes of funny material. And the end of the course was to actually perform at the comedy club in Soho one evening, and it was a forgiving audience because we invited our friends and family and whoever else, and so we weren't likely to get heckled, but we took it in turns and we performed 6 of us a night, I think, for 2 different nights. And in order to prepare for that, I stood in front of a mirror and had a microphone at home, and I practiced going through my routine, and I just did it again and again and again, trying to hit the beats and the pauses and the sort of, the moments you want to really emphasize or deliver, or the little gaps and so on for comedic effect. And then when it came to the night, I was surprisingly calm, because I'm quite an anxious person normally. And I'm about to go on stage at a comedy night, and I'm reasonably calm, and we're all the performers, all the student performers are standing around in the back having a drink, and I'm not feeling too stressed. And then what we've been told was that in order to get ready for our particular slot, we knew who was on before us, we knew our position in the show. I was last but one, which is quite a good billing. And when the guy went on before me, I realized, it's time for me to get behind the curtain so that I can step on stage and actually deliver my 5 minutes. And so I got down there and I stood behind this curtain, waiting for this guy before me to finish. And then I suddenly thought, what the fuck am I doing? I'm about to step on a Soho Comedy Club stage and deliver my 5-minute routine. And so the stress kind of hit 10 out of 10 at that point. And then Logan introduces me and asked me on stage, and I walk on and I can't see anything because the lights are so bright on you that you can barely see the audience. I could see a little bit of the audience, and my girlfriend was there at the time, and some friends. Couldn't see them at all. And what I did was, thank God all that practice paid off. So what I found is that I just dropped into that routine. And I particularly paid attention to my opening sentence, because a lot of people are kind of, made it up as they went along. So they'd said something about, hey, how are you doing tonight? And by the time the sixth person has said, how are you doing tonight, it gets a little tedious. So I'd practiced my first line, and I'd practiced all of it so that I could just do it without thinking too much. And what I found is it was like a needle dropping into a groove. I just did even the mannerisms and the gestures and the pauses. I did everything as I practiced it over and over again in my bedroom in front of the mirror with an unplugged microphone. And it really worked, and people laughed. And I was delighted. I came off stage, and all of my fellow students said, like, oh my God, you are like the most improved student, because they'd seen me doing this sort of mildly amusing stuff and no laughs. And all that practice had paid off. And so I was absolutely delighted. I went on to do a handful of comedy gigs. By that point, I quit my job at Deloitte. and then I was getting into technical consulting to broadcasters, and I found it eventually a bit too difficult to do stand-up comedy gigs in the evening and then turn up at a consulting gig in the morning. So I just paused it, stopped it. But it was a great thing. I was so glad I did, and mostly I did pretty well in that handful of gigs. One of them I kind of died, but it was a weird gig where they had half poets and half comedians, and it was a great thing to do. I thoroughly recommend it. I'm maybe a little bit weird in that I find it less terrifying to step on stage and do comedy than I would to just go and dance at a nightclub. That's what I find terrifying. It's like, let's express ourselves. I'd rather perform a comedy routine on stage in front of people. And what I learned, I guess, from that was just exercise that creative muscle. It shook off the Deloitte shackles of having to behave a certain way. It taught me that I can do scary things and be okay. It gave me an experience of doing something completely different that was creative. That's what I really wanted to do. And now I use that same kind of comedy, potential that I have, such that I have, to in my normal everyday life, in my social media content. I like making jokes, being funny, sharing memes. I use it when I'm delivering talks. I'm not very serious and businesslike. I make really interesting points, hopefully, but I do it with humor and an informality, which is very much my style. So if you're interested in stand-up comedy and you're thinking of doing it, leave a comment, let me know if you've got any questions. I strongly recommend it if you think you can cope with I know some people find it absolutely terrifying, but if you think you can cope with it, it's a great experience. And there are quite a few comedy clubs around now that do these courses.